again at Ventures, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features in 5th edition D&D to help you get the most out of your choices. So today, we are continuing this series on backgrounds and how to use your background for more than just flavor during character creation. If you've watched the other the other backgrounds episodes, you know my main focus in this is this idea that people choose their backgrounds at first level and then forget that they exist or may reference them randomly, but they don't use their backgrounds like they would their class or their class features. And I think that's a huge mistake because your background does give you mechanical, actual benefits you can use in the game to give yourself new choices, new options, and unique ways to solve problems that come up. So, trying to make these slightly more manageable. So I'm going to dive into the next background super quick, and we'll see how quickly we can launch through this. So, then the next background we're dealing with is the noble background. Now, the first thing I kind of have to say with the noble is compared to literally any other background in the entire PHB, the noble is, in my opinion, the most complicated. What do you mean complicated? Well, to put it in perspective, each background has a little description that kind of helps you get the feel for what the background does and how it's supposed to work. Most of them are a paragraph. Some of the ones that require a little bit more explanation might get to 2 paragraphs. The noble is 5 paragraphs. And the last 3 paragraphs are just lists of questions to help kind of define your specific flavor of nobility. And the reason the noble background is so complex is because nobility is really, really complex. To give you a very, 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 very brief history lesson, during the Middle Ages, you didn't really have countries. You just had massive amounts of little land that were eventually conquered by various tribes. I believe this is what the article I just read said. Charlemagne, who was part of the Franks, actually that tribe controlled a pretty large portion of Europe, and he came up with this idea where we call it the feudalism now, which is effectively you have a king, and the king owns all the land, and he would give out these things called fiefs as a way to ensure compliance with his rule. He would give these fiefs out to local leaders called nobles, and it would be their job to protect everyone on their fief, on the land that they controlled, and they would get a title of nobility. Now, that title would be passed to their firstborn son, and so these fiefs of land soon became ruled by dynasties, basically by family members that continued down the line. There was a lot of benefit to this. The king could have control over a much larger amount of land than he could possibly ever rule on his own, and by making it the nobles' job to protect the lands that they owned while still or they didn't own, protect the lands that were given to them from the king. The king still owned the land, but they got to profit off of that land as long as they protected it and kept their peasants happy, because the way they made profit was off of the work of their peasants. So everyone had an incentive to kind of work together to a point. During feudalism, there was tons of issues with nobles. Basically became their own warlords, despite the fact that the king had quote unquote authority. The further away you were from the kingdoms themselves, the less that authority mattered. And most of the king's authority came from the armies that were controlled by each of the lords. So if the lord rebelled, the army they raised to protect their land and do the king's bidding would also leave. There's also issues with nobles fighting with other nobles to try and get more land and things like that. So it was a somewhat chaotic time, but feudalism, for the most part, worked to a point. It wasn't a great living, but it did work. In the idea that there was a king, he was able to control large amounts of land he would never be able to control normally, and the nobles were able to work that land and turn it profitable for the king and for their own enrichment. Did it work perfectly? No, and a lot of people were in really bad situations. But that's where our idea of nobility comes from, is effectively a noble was someone that was gifted with a land that they were basically said, hey, listen, you get to keep this little land and you get to make money off of it as long as you actually develop the land and make it profitable. Oh, and you also do everything I say. You don't own this land. You own the title I gave you to this land, and I can take it back whenever I want. So make sure you don't piss me off. So that's where this idea of nobility comes from, and that's the reason why it's just so complicated. And we'll actually get into it a little bit more when we talk about the background feature. Nobility is unbelievably complicated for the main reason being the nobles had their own world that they kind of lived in. They dealt with things that the peasant population never even thought about. Nobles, when you were very young, especially if you were the firstborn, though really all of them would learn a little bit, you would learn politics. Politics was just something that the peasants never dealt with. Unlike politics now, where we all know, all this weird random stuff about this politician is doing this and this negotiation, it didn't happen with the peasants because they had no control over where they lived, effectively. If you did need to, you generally didn't leave the land that you worked on unless you were some sort of migrant worker. If you had a house or something, you weren't moving to another noble's property or something. The nobility didn't want that because if people could move and choose where they wanted to live, it would reduce the nobility's power. So nobility knew about politics and how to negotiate and things like this. They learned tactics in warfare. They learned things like dance and etiquette and all of this stuff that they never allowed the peasants to even glimpse at. Things like writing and reading were limited to the nobility for centuries. Because the ability for the nobility to have a large knowledge base and prevent the peasantry from having a large knowledge base was super beneficial to the nobility, because they could effectively lie, they could make shit up. There was no way they could change history. And as long as the lie kept going for maybe a single generation, which wasn't that long, it would become facts. And the only people that really would know the difference would be scribes and the rest of the nobility. So because the nobility lived effectively in their own world, it dealing with the nobles versus dealing with kind of the regular peasantry class took different skills, and it was actually it was near impossible for a peasant to actually interact with the nobility, because they had no ability to learn all the unwritten rules. And the nobility had a hard time dealing with the peasantry, beyond issuing commands and things like that. Because again, the stuff that nobility were worried about, the peasants didn't, and the stuff that peasants had to worry about, the nobles had no idea. Um, so you have this where being a noble meant you basically didn't just know an entire other language, you knew an entire other culture. And then there's the issue that nobility was not this blanket as a statement. Even as you got further on in nobility, you actually had kind of these ranks built in. You had barons and dukes and uh, um, all of these different levels of nobility. Two barons could have the exact same rank, the exact same amount of land, the exact same number of vassals, and still show up to the exact same gathering and be treated completely differently, because this family is warring with this family, or this ancestor insulted this other person's as his ancestor, who's an ally of this family. It was unbelievably complicated. So the reason they have three full paragraphs of questions for you is because all of those things can come up if you're attempting to use your nobility in game to give you some sort of advantage or a different way to solve a problem. To go into the actual skill proficiencies, these actually make a ton of sense. The two proficiencies they have are history and persuasion. And again, one of the huge advantages the nobility had over the peasant class was they knew history. They could do research, and history in D&D is effectively just remembering events that don't really fit into anything. Like Arcana is technically Arcana history, and religion is religious history. They're all basically the intelligence-based skills are all basically remembering something I've read somewhere or I learned somewhere. Again, nobles had a huge advantage on just about everyone else because they had a knowledge base that they could access. And then persuasion is the other half of nobility. It's politicking. It's being able to influence people, being able to negotiate treaties and the things like that between different lords. All of those are incredibly vital to a noble because that's how they operated. While your regular adventurer that grew up, in poverty and things like that, they would grow up and they'd know that, okay, well, in order to survive in this area, you have to have good sword arm. You have to understand how farming works, or maybe you need to learn mercantile skills, things like that. For a noble, the ability to fight is pretty low on the ladder, though honor duels and the things like that were something that were sometimes used to resolve conflicts. And during war and stuff like that, some nobles did lead their troops into battle. So it wasn't like combat was not something that they learned, but equally as important was the ability to meet with another general or noble and negotiate to terms. For combat, to know not just how you yourself can fight, but other tactics and warfare, the things that allow your army to have an edge up over them. Understanding map reading and map making and things like that. All these really, really important things for nobility. And persuasion got a lot of that. You don't have a cartographer that is somehow indebted to you or works for you. then you better be able to negotiate with one. You will always have other noble families that are trying to infringe on your territory, and they can do that through conquest. Though they can easily also to do it by just petitioning the king, saying that you aren't developing the land correctly, and if the king gives it to them, they will develop the land much better than you. So as much as warfare in the D&D, a lot of people think, a D&D is a fight simulator, which it isn't, but it can be used that way. Nobility warfare was just one means to an end, and persuasion, even in warfare, was a really important skill. The other things you get, tool proficiency of a gaming set, which kind of just leads into the kind of more leisure focused lifestyle of nobles, where again, as a peasant, you don't really have as much time to sit down and play cards and get really good at it, because you have to actually work to survive. And then the other thing you get is you get to choose a language of your choice, which again would make sense in a multilingual society. Nobles would effectively learn as many languages as was needed to be able to effectively negotiate with neighbors and things like that. The ability to speak a language that your rival doesn't gives you a huge edge in negotiations. So yeah, the feature is the one thing I think they tried to simplify. After getting as confusing as they did with the description of Noble, they tried to make the feature really simple, which I think does it a bit of an injustice. Which it basically says the feature is position of privilege, which is effectively, it says you're welcomed in high society. People assume you have the right to be where you are, and common folk make every accommodation to you and avoid your displeasure. Other people of high birth treat you as a member of the same social sphere, and you can secure an audience with local noble if you need to. That's not how nobility works, and I think that actually gives you, it actually handicaps you a little bit if you are going to be playing a noble, because rivalries can be as useful as a membership to this secret club of nobility. Yeah, it's nice that you can go into high society and just be suspected, which to a point, the nobles will always think better of nobles than they will of peasants. But I think it's equally as useful to have certain groups of nobles or certain families that hate your guts, that won't allow you to their high society functions. That they're the common folk that live and work for rival nobility will actually do everything they can to hurt you. To prevent you from getting what you want. As much as that sounds like it's just creating extra obstacles for a character, it isn't, mostly because if you can predict someone's actions, you can use those actions to get what you want. So if you know this particular group is going to react negatively to you, you can always use that to your advantage. And there's certain situations where going somewhere and having people attack you and revile you can actually be more useful to you than everyone just liking you and doing whatever you say. So that's the only kind of modification I would make in my games, is the idea that nobility comes with benefits and disadvantages, and both of those are important just as much as common folk that are that are either your subjects or are subjects of lords and nobles that are friendly to you will try to benefit you. Your rival lords and nobles will actively try to hurt you. And depending on how smart the other nobles are, I think that creates a much more interesting dynamic and gives you a lot more choices you can make. as a player. Now, there is a variant noble called the knight. And knighthood is probably one of the more interesting things. And I think I personally enjoy the knights over the nobility background, simply because knighthood is a little bit less complicated. Knighthood is effectively the lowest form of nobility, but you're not a real noble. Again, we talked before, nobles are given a fief, which is a piece of land, from the king to develop and protect. They are landowners. Knights are given a title from a noble of some sort, which can be all the way up to the king, or can be, your local duke or baron. But effectively, nobility is given or inherited. Knighthood is earned. And knighthood is actually remarkably common in a lot of different societies. Whereas, like, a lot of people, like feudal Japan had a somewhat similar system to feudal England, where the samurai were effectively the samurai, and then eventually the shogunate were effectively the nobility. But they had a slightly different. They were much more battle focused and much more martial focused for the most part. They still had politics and all that stuff there. But samurai effectively were the knights, and they were literally just professional warriors. And when you look at knighthood in various societies, that's effectively what a knight was. Is they were a professional warrior. They were more than just the rank and file. Like a interesting fact, in feudal England, it was required by law for peasants to learn archery. And this was done specifically because the English longbow was a remarkably powerful weapon of war. And it would make it very easy to raise a militia whenever the noble needed. So by law, every I believe it was just males, every male member of society had to know how to use a bow, simply because it would make it really, really easy for them to just be called up. And being in warfare, being an archer is not the most technically complicated job. Yes, archery is difficult, requires training, but being an archer on the battlefield, you're actually away from the fighting in general. And you have someone telling you when to fire, when not to fire, and where to aim. Whereas people that are fighting in the actual melee require a lot more autonomy, where they have to, they'll have a commander telling them where to go. But in the thick of it, they have to choose which direction to go, who to fight, all that stuff. It's being a melee combatant from a technical aspect is just much more complicated. And that's kind of where knights come in. Knights was not something you just went, oh, I'm going to be a knight today. A lot of knights started their training at about like 7. By the time you were around like 14-ish, you could become a squire. And eventually you would hopefully earn your knighthood. And because it was given by a lord, you were basically indebted to the lord, but you were also kind of suspected to go out and just kind of do good, to make the lord look better, to further cement your knighthood. And if you did well enough, your lord may eventually give you a plot of land, and then you become the other kind of noble, where once you have land, that's inherited nobility. So there were some nobles that started as earned nobility as knights, and then turned into inherited nobility. So yeah, so for knights specifically, knights can be peasants or nobles, or they can start as peasants or nobles. Because there were, if you weren't the for firstborn son of a noble, you weren't getting the land unless your older brother got killed or did something super stupid. So it's extremely common for second and the thirdborn sons to be to go into knighthood. Um, so I like the knight a little bit, but better just because it gives you more options. You get to trade on your lord's reputation rather than your own, and people will treat you a little different. The other thing that's kind of cool, there is a variant feature for nobility, which I like and don't at the same time. It's retainers. We basically get three retainers that can do things like prepare meals for you. They can get messenger, or they can act as messengers, stuff like that. They won't follow you into the dungeons, and if you're constantly getting them in dangerous situations, they'll quit. But it's again, it's an interesting choice as far as giving you options in the game, because again, when you have effectively extra players that your character gets to play, where you have these retainers, just having more people can do a lot. Even in a persuasive conversation between you and one other person, having other people to back you up is a big deal. And then there's always the idea of being able to effectively be multiple places at once by sending your retainers to do things for you. So yeah, that's the noble. Like I said, massively complicated, um, but it can be really fun, especially again if you're playing a city-based campaign. Those can be an absolute blast to be a noble or just a knight. Because again, city-based, you're going to deal with politics, and that's where nobles should shine. So next one. I gotta take a drink real quick. Much better. So, Outlander is the next one, and I mentioned this in relation to Hermit. Outlanders and Hermits are kind of two sides of this. It's the same coin, because at their base, they are both characters that either grow up or have spent a significant amount of time in the wild, outside of society. Um, and really, the difference between Outlanders and hermits is really their purpose being out there. Well, a hermit will effectively be based on the idea of self enrichment and learning their own selves. Outlanders tend to be a little bit more kind of natural focused, where they just feel more connected to the wilds. They may go as far as being like anti-civilization, or it could just be that they simply don't like politics, or they don't like how money corrupts so much of interactions, or a lot of different things, and so they make their living outside of society, and that gives them certain skills. Speaking of skills, and this description is only one paragraph. Um, Speaking of skills, their skill proficiencies are athletics and survival, which just fits. It fits really well, because athletics are doing things like climbing trees and going over difficult terrain and stuff like that. And survival is what Outlanders did do. Personally, I really like Outlanders in general as just kind of a character theme. I think it's really fun to be the person that's grown up in the wild, or has matured in the wild. Maybe they didn't get out there until they were an adult, but then they spent 15 years out there and effectively matured there. You also get a musical instrument of your preference for tool proficiency, which again makes sense. The ability to kind of entertain yourself, and especially being a musician, there is something really uh, breathtaking is really the best way to describe it, about playing music in nature. It's really a unique experience. Um, and there are a lot of musicians and composers that gets a lot of influence and inspiration from being in the nature. So that just kind of fits. They also get a little language of their choice, which when we talk about the origin, you'll kind of understand why. Um, Outlanders in general can effectively kind of live off the land, uh, but unless they happen to be a blacksmith outlander that happens to have a forge on hand, they're still need to going to they're still going to need to trade for certain things. Yeah, you can make your own arrows and the things like that, and creating arrowheads from rocks and that is not an impossible thing to do. However, metal arrowheads are going to be more effective than rock ones, and more reusable. Even if you have to make a new shaft, you can reuse a lot of metal arrowheads. When you start dealing with things like were creatures, which show up in the wild, having silvered arrows is something you need a blacksmith for, and any melee weapons. Again, you can create like an obsidian and a knife or something like that, where it's or a stone and a knife where it's chiseled out of something. But to have something really really good, you need a blacksmith, and therefore, Outlanders need a sort of profession. Uh, and so you have what's called your origin, which kind of explains why you're an Outlander and kind of gives you a profession as well. And they have stuff like bounty hunter or forester or trapper. To do something like that, but they'll also have the things like tribal nomad, hunter gatherer. So it gives a kind of wide variety, but that language, that additional language that you can speak, is going to be useful because you're going to be dealing with natives of the land that you live on, in addition to the society that goes through. And if you are, a hunter gatherer, or a guide is another one, you're going to hire yourself out to people from society to guide them through the wilderness. And sometimes that's done just as a means of money. Sometimes it's done to ensure they don't hurt the actual ecosystem. You'll hire yourself out as a guide so you can ensure they're not walking through, fox dens and something like that and displacing animals. It's entirely up to you as to why you interact with society. But you will at one point be interacting with society. And by the time you become an adventurer, you're going to be interacting with society significantly more. The feature, which I really, really like, because again, it adds so many things that you can use in a game, is called Wanderer. And the one that most people think is the best mechanical benefit is actually kind of boring, and I don't think anywhere near as useless. The second half, the useful one most people think of, is you can find fresh food and fresh water for yourself and up to 5 other people every day, provide the land offers berries, small game, water, blah, blah, blah. So as long as it exists there, you can find it, which is useful. However, the first half, I think, is even more useful. You have an excellent memory for maps and geography, and you can always recall the general layout of terrain, settlements, and other features around you. That is super, super useful, not for what you think. A lot of people will use this effectively like, oh, then I can never get lost. Well, yes and no. There, even if you know the general layout of everything around you, you can still get confused and lost, especially on things like an overcast day, or especially on an overcast night. If you have to travel in the night and there are no stars, there's no moon, no nothing, and you're just traveling blind, you can get lost super quick. However, the ability to recall general layout of terrain specifically and other features around you is massively useful. And why is it useful? Because when you need to get somewhere, and this can be in the city or this can be in the wilderness, someone that can remember terrain and things like that can be massively useful when you go, hey, we need to get in that building, but going through the front entrance is going to be a pain in the ass. Someone that just has that kind of mini map in their mind is going to go, well, we just, an hour ago, we passed by this building, which was right on the river. And we know that the river empties into the basements of some of these places, and blah, 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 and just sit there and go, well, we can do this, and this, and it'll be really useful. Or again, if you're in the wilderness, well, we need to get into this cave, but it's guarded by this, and this. Well, if we go this way and do this, or if we lure them in this general direction, this is going to be the best place to set a trap. Or we could actually tunnel into this cave system from over here, because I remember seeing this and this, and that generally means that the rocket, everything is going to be easier from there, so we don't have to use their entrance. The ability to get into a place from an alternate direction than people are prepared for is unbelievably useful. Anytime you can get people off their expectations and force them to kind of improvise in the moment, you are going to have the advantage in a conflict. And this is any kind of conflict, whether it's actual physical martial conflict, it could be just arguments, it could be negotiations. If you can set them off balance and force them to react to what you are doing instead of you reacting to what they are doing, you have the advantage. And being able to show up in a place you're not supposed to be, being able to come from a direction that they're not suspecting in any situation is going to give you at least a slight edge. So that's my favorite aspect of the Wanderer, is because they are so used to having to go around and travel deer paths and all these weird trails to get to where they want. They're kind of used to thinking outside of the box. And if you're going to be an Outlander, that is a really, really good, great way to get the best use out of your class or your background, is constantly be thinking of alternate ways to do something. Never go at something directly, because in the natural world, going at something directly is a great way to get attacked. So that is the Outlander. Finally, for this video, we have the Sage. The Sage, its description is 3 sentences. It's super, super simple, and most people just equivocate Sage with nerd. They just go, oh, these are the bookworms. That's all sages are good for, which isn't really true, and really underplays the value of being a sage. Sages, and the idea of a sage is a revered expert on a subject, and that reverence can be incredibly useful. Or in the same vein, a lack of reverence can be just as useful, because we'll talk about the specialty in a second here that I really, really like. If we go into skill proficiencies, they get Arcana and History. Again, we talked before, all the intelligence-based skills are effectively history. You're remembering something you read or you learned. Arcana is a specific form of history where you're remembering things about magic in general and the arcane. So yes, it can be magic spells, which a lot of people kind of default Arcana to, oh, it's magic spells. Arcana can just as easily be the line of Blackstaffs in Waterdeep, like who's been the Blackstaff since the original. Arcana can be understanding the hierarchical structure of the Arcane Brotherhood, which is a group of people in the Ten Towns, which is Icewind Dale, which is where the latest book was published. The Arcane Brotherhood are kind of almost a mafia, a magic mafia, but they are arcane. They're a bunch of wizards and things like that, and they throw their weight around a lot. Arcana can be understanding their societal structure as much as it can be knowing that Melf's acid arrow is the second or the third. I've forgotten. It's a wizard spell created by this dude named Melf, who is a cool guy. So never underestimate the value of these history things. And then languages, you get 2 languages of your choice, which unlike the last 2 where you got extra languages, this one, your languages you get specifically because it gives you access to more knowledge. And for Forgotten Realms, there's actually a lost magic empire called Netheril. And then depending on how deep you get into the Netheril lore, the Netherese, which is the people that lived in Netheril, the Netherese people basically wiped themselves out because they tried casting an uber powerful spell that broke existence. Like they actually damaged the arcane weave because they were trying. I think they were trying to recreate like Evermeet. I think is what they were trying to do. I can't remember, but they were an entire society, and they had their own little language. They were destroyed, hundreds of years before adventures started traveling around Faerun. And so all of this incredible magical knowledge and history would be locked behind understanding the Netherese language. If you can't read Netherese, you're going to have to hope someone else that reads Netherese has already done work on things like mythos and other interesting things that that Netheril used a ton. Like they had floating cities and this is stuff like that. Like all that's trapped behind a little language barrier. So having additional languages for the Sage is specifically a tool to getting you more information, which may actually be influenced by your specialty, which is your flavor of Sage. So they have things like alchemists, astronomers. I think my personal favorite one is discredited academic, meaning you worked at some sort of place of higher learning, and something you did pissed somebody off, and then they blackballed you effectively. Now, what you did could be you ran your mouth off and said something completely untrue, and nobody believes you know anything anymore because you effectively lied to people. That can get you discredited. Just as easily, you can come up with a theory or something that is 100% true, but the rest of the academic society just doesn't like it. And you can get discredited that way. And I think, and there's a lot of other ways you can get discredited. You can just piss off someone that's more powerful than you, and they'll wipe you off the face of academia. And this happens nowadays, by the way. There are a lot of people that have been chased out of academia and the scientific community simply because they published a paper that certain people didn't like, or they insulted someone that had a lot of sway, and it caused them to get thrown out. My favorite one, I can't remember the guy's name now, but I did a report on him because I did the history in college. I did for one of my natural science courses. I did a history of germ theory. And the fact was that the first proof of germ theory actually came in like the 16th, I think it's the 16th century, 16th or 17th century. They were actually able to start showing that the current scientific accepted principle of miasma is what spread disease, which is basically bad air. all disease was spread by these clouds of bad air. Um, as early as the 1600s, we had proof that that was not the case. But it took all the way until I think like 1910 or 1920 for it actually to gain traction in the scientific community, because it was going against what was accepted as a scientific fact. And there was one scientist in particular, I believe he was a doctor, who he just went on this thing. Is like, please, for the love of God, wash your hands. That was his big push. It's like, please, we'll wash your hands, because there would be doctors that would go directly from autopsies to delivering babies, and then the mothers would die from infections. And he was able to show causal links between not washing your hands after an autopsy and an increased risk of death in birth. And he became so vocal about this that the scientific community not only did it discredited him, but they also said he was crazy, sent him to an insane asylum, where 2 weeks after getting there, the guards beat him to death, and he died. So becoming a discredited academic can actually give you a lot of fuel for your character and motivations. If you're discredited for good reason, you did something wrong, and published something that got people hurt or killed, you have to make up for the bad information. If you're discredited because somebody didn't like you, or you were fighting against the norms that everyone believed are true, it can give you motivation to either, on one hand, it could make you more make you want to fight the power more, or in the other society can make you be much meeker and not want to speak out for fear of being ousted from the place that you called home. So a lot of really interesting stuff just with that. And then there's all the other ones. Researchers, scribes, another one that's really interesting, because your job is literally being able to accurately reproduce books, which before printing presses was really, really valuable. And because you're writing the same thing over and over again, you could glean a ton of knowledge. So, and then the feature. This is the one where, again, everyone goes, oh, it's a book nerd. The feature is whenever you attempt to recall a piece of lore, if you don't know it offhand, you also you generally know where and from whom you can obtain it. Basically, if you don't know something off the top of your head, you know where to find it, which just on its face is massively useful. Again, information and the knowledge in D&D is incredibly effective as far as giving you advantages. Knowing weaknesses of certain monsters can make you instrumental in being able to fight them. Knowing the lay of the land, or knowing how to get a map of somewhere, can be super useful to you. And if you have an Outlander in your party, you guys can work together. You find the maps that the Outlander interprets them, and you both are able to help plan battles and the things like that significantly more effectively. So as far as mechanical benefit, that's really good. In addition, I think another mechanical benefit can definitely be just the title of Sage, and your specialty can be used in a lot of situations very similarly to the title of Noble, where, I'm a Sage, and you can kind of go into more limited circles, because everyone recognizes nobility. Not everyone will care that they have a really famous alchemist, or just a really studied alchemist. You don't need to be famous. Yeah, I would also say, use researcher, because, again, massively useful in a number of situation. But don't be afraid to go into a city, and if you need to get information about something, go, hey, is there an astronomist, or is there an alchemist guild here? because I am an alchemist, so I can just go to talk to them and see if I can get a read of the town. Because the alchemists that live and work in town are going to know the populace much better than some drunk in a bar. Because they not only have to interact with these people, they have to know how to get them to spend money. So yeah, Sage, again, really useful, and the stereotypical version of haha, I'm a sage, can be a lot of fun. But don't forget, the sage can be a lot more than just I know a lot of books. Yeah. So that's gonna be it for this video. As always, please like the video. It really does help me out in letting me know what you guys enjoy me making, and it also helps with searches and stuff like that. I've recently been getting a little bit more, I would call it random to traffic to my pages, where some of my videos are being recommended to people, and they're learning about my stuff, not through direct word of mouth, but simply because the videos are getting more popular. And by more popular, I mean more than 10 or 20 views. So please like the video in the comments below. Let me know, because we only have one more background thing we're going to do. Let me know if there are other backgrounds to supplements. Like I said, just about every adventure has at least one or two backgrounds in it. All of these supplement books have additional backgrounds. Are there other backgrounds that you'd like me to take a crack at it? Well, how can I use this actively instead of passively? So put that in the comments down below. Comments also help other people to find it. And as always, subscribe to the channel so you can see more of the stuff I make. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today, and I will see you guys next time, all right? Bye-bye!